What is depression? It's a mental health disorder characterized by persistently depressed mood or loss of interest in activities causing significant impairment in daily life. It can be simplified as the extreme and persistent feelings of sadness, despair, and loss of interest in previous sources of pleasure. Depression affects functioning, and it's more than temporary. Although it affects mostly your emotions, it can also affect your thinking and physical functioning. Various factors can cause depression, for instance, life circumstances, challenges, trauma, illness, and so on. Possible causes include a combination of biological, psychological, and social sources of distress. Major depression can lead to a range of behavioral and physical symptoms. These may include changes in sleep, appetite, energy level, concentration, daily behavior, or self-esteem. Depression can also be associated with thoughts of suicide. More women than men present with depression. Men battle to present with depression due to the stigma associated with mental health. The impact of depression at work. These statistics come from SADC. 74% of people engaged experience one or more of these cognitive symptoms the last time they had depression. Trouble concentrating, indecisiveness, forgetfulness. 54% of people who experienced depression said they took more time to complete simple jobs, while 50% made more mistakes than usual at work. 18 days on average, that's people with depression, took 18 days off work due to their depression in South Africa. 1 in 4, that's over 25% of respondents have been diagnosed by a healthcare professional. 25%, only a quarter of managers felt they had very good support in dealing with employees with depression. 50%, there's half of managers don't know how many sick days are due to employees having depression. 80% of those who have taken time off work because of depression, 32% of these didn't tell the employer the reason why they took off. 1 in 10 don't know how to react or what to say to someone with depression. 80% of those diagnosed with depression continue to work during their last episode of depression. This is just a graphical representation of sort of what I've dealt with. Some of the interesting things in terms of depression, 40% of people who were engaged, 21% bipolar, 16% anxiety. 2 in 3 disclosed their mental health conditions to a co-worker. 61% disclosed to a manager or a supervisor. Having a mental illness can affect relationships. 74% of people reported that. Work performance, 72% of people reported that. Capability, 49%. Leave days, 42%. Promotions, 33%. This is a behavioral changes checklist that you fill out when you go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I thought just to list it up there and for people to take note of. So there's a noticeable and persistent sadness, tearfulness, and crying. There's an isolation and a withdrawing from others. There's changes in personal appearance, for example, untidiness. There's a loss of motivation, loss of energy, appearing lethargic, tired, or exhausted, irritability and mood swings, apathy, loss of interest in previously enjoyed activities, change in work performance, changes in sleeping patterns, either you sleep more or you sleep less, expressing hopelessness and helplessness, engaging in unsafe and reckless behaviors, constantly coming to work late or leaving work early, increased alcohol intake, abuse of substances as well as medication, a loss or an increase in appetite for food. Now let's get to me. Of course, I'm not going to tell you everything because that would maybe scare you all off. But it's to give you a sense of the humanness of and the normality of who I am. I'm not defined by depression. When my family saw this photo, we were battling to put it in a timeline as to when it was taken. They say my hair is a lot grayer now. It may have been just before I was diagnosed. The next slide is actually my most favorite. You see, I think if we had to see each other in our soul form, this is how we would look. You know, battle-scarred. Think of the Vikings and knights from the Middle Ages, the type of wounds that they would inflict on each other. If you lost a hand in battle, there was no artificial limb in those days, so you'd walk around without your hand. And I think those scars tell a story. They're reminders of when life, situations, circumstances have tried to break us, but have failed. The fact that we're all sitting here shows that they failed. I'm a husband of one wife. I don't know why I said one wife. I've got a friend who always used to say, my current wife, and I used to ask him, why do you say your current wife? He used to say, well, it's my current wife. I'm the father of a son and daughter, Caleb and Rachel. I'm the son of a mother and father, Mary and Rex. I'm a nephew and cousin. I'm a colleague and friend. Unfortunately, due to the fact that I work for the State Security Agency, I can't expose the names and photos of friends. But I wanted to reflect the fact that I am a colleague and a friend to some. When did this thing called depression happen to me? You know, an interesting thing, when I applied to join the intelligence services in 1990, in 1991, I was interviewed by a psychologist. And at the end of that interview, she said, you know, I'm very happy with you, but I've just got one concern. I said, what's that? Expecting something profound. She says, I'm worried that you're going to burn yourself out one day. And I laughed it off. It never registered with me because in my early 20s, what does one know about burnout? But indeed, 1995 was the first time I was diagnosed with burnout. I spent a year in Umtata. That's in eastern parts of Eastern Cape. You might say, what we're doing there? 94, 95, about 11 intelligence services linked to non-statutory forces and homelands amalgamated. And I was transferred to Umtata. The next bout was 1997. I was transferred to KwaZulu-Natal. At that time, those that can recall, there was this thing, political killings was rampant. It's almost a low-intensity civil war was happening in KwaZulu-Natal. So you can imagine that work pace was hectic. Then I sort of disappeared for a while in terms of the type of work I did. Popped up in 2007 in Pretoria. And 2008 was diagnosed with burnout. Now the funny thing about it was I went to my GP and she very apologetically said, look, you've got burnout and I'm going to have to write it on your reason for being booked off. And I didn't understand, well, if that's the reality, then write it. And I remember I was given 5 days off, which at the time was quite a nice surprise. Let me tell you how I spent that 5 days. The first 3 days I spent at work, trying to hand over the work and finish jobs that were left undone. And when I engaged my supervisor, who's actually a close friend now, and I said to him, Chief, I'm been diagnosed with burnout. He looked at me and he said, but it can't be because of work, can it? And I said to him, yeah, Chief, you know, I would also love to come to work at 12 and leave at 4. And then he said a profound thing to me. He said, why don't you? So I realized much of the stress was self-inflicted, and the drive to try and complete work that was not done. But the really bad years came in 2013, when I had what would be classified as a breakdown. I was booked off for an extended period. Coming into 2014 was the first time I was hospitalized at Denmark Psychiatric Hospital. From the start, I decided I'm not going to hide what had happened. So sitting in the waiting room with my family, waiting to be checked in, I said to my wife, no, post on Facebook that I'm leaving for Denmark. And the funny thing was, a friend contacted me and said, no, I must enjoy my trip. So I was sort of like, what trip are you talking about? So he had misread it and thought that I was leaving for Denmark, the country, and was wishing me well on the travel. Well, I was diagnosed with severe major depressive disorder with cognitive impairment. So when they did an assessment, my concentration span couldn't last longer than 3 minutes. At the time, the occupational therapist said, you know, a normal person, 30 minutes is fine. So I spent a year doing occupational therapy, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's like a child playing games, you know, moving cars around a route with obstacles in the way. And some of the funny things that happened is that you need to get this car out of where it is and out the gate. So I would try one way and it didn't work. I'd try the second way, it didn't work. Try the third way, it didn't work. Try the fourth way, it didn't work. Try the fifth way, it didn't work. By the 50th time, nothing was working. At the end of the session, I think that went on for 30 minutes. So the occupational therapist was sitting watching me. He said, do you realize what you were doing? I said, no. All I know is I didn't get the car out. He said, well, you tried the same 3 solutions over and over and over and over again because your brain didn't realize that you'd already tried. Some of the other funny ways she would interfere with my thinking, she would give me an extremely difficult task, difficult in the conditions at the time, and then she would proceed to start telling me about her kid and how they were doing at nursery school, and I was getting like really frustrated and irritated because I'm trying to focus on getting better in this job in front of me. Then at the end she said, so I saw you were frustrated with the stories I was telling you. So I'm trying to be decent and respectful, and I sort of said, yeah, well, maybe a little bit. And she said, well, it's done on purpose because it's to test your ability to deal with more than one stimulus at a time. The rest of the time in Denmark, I mean, I think once you've been in psychiatric hospital, you belong to a small club. And I remember Tygerberg Psychiatric Hospital in the Cape were selling T-shirts to raise money. And what appealed to me was the provocative slogans that they had put on the T-shirts. So on the front of the T-shirts would be normal, but it would say norm, nor, mal. Mal, Afrikaans for mad. And in the hospital, I think you start relating to others, and this thing called depression almost becomes something you can joke about to each other. No one gets offended when you're all sitting in the mental hospital because you're all there for the same reason. Others for other, bipolar, And there would be like a swapping of war stories, you know. Who's the maddest of us all? And what's the worst type of situation you've been in? In fact, I became the go-to man for cigarettes and buying cell phones. Of course, not me personally. I didn't run a smuggling network into Denmark. But my wife, I would phone her and say, listen, this guy needs a box of cigarettes, and then she would organize it. And it was probably a way that I was dealing with that situation at the time. You know, I embraced this thing of trying to understand it so much that, and being one of the older people there, you find that people want to share their stories. And I think that's the importance of what we're doing now, because many of the people in Denmark were on a spectrum from mild to very severe depression and other mental health issues. But I think the one thing that they all really desired was for someone to listen to them. Well, I finished that episode, prepared myself to go back to work, like preparing a legal brief, a lawyer preparing a legal brief, to motivate why I shouldn't be put back into the same situation. Luckily, I had understanding boss, and I was sort of left alone for 7 months recovery. But you know, someone's idea of recovery, one of the ladies in the passage was concerned that another lady who was sort of probably on the autism spectrum would continuously bother me, according to the other lady. And they spoke to the general manager. So next minute he sends out an Outlook email to the whole country's intelligence officers, field officers, saying no one is allowed to speak to Brett Freem at all. Of course, in the environment, some people thought I was being investigated, others thought other things, but yes, I was left alone. Going into 2015, as Craig was sharing, you know, the medication wasn't doing that much. Psychiatrist was concerned, and the only option at that stage was electroconvulsive therapy or shock treatment. Those of you that are old enough to remember One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a film made about the horrors of shock treatment. It's the same, except the bed's nicer. They give you an anesthetic so that you don't really realize what is happening to you. But the idea is to actually induce convulsions. Of course, they put a bit in your mouth, and I remember on 1 or 2 sessions, my jaw was actually quite sore. The psychiatrist would say it was a good convulsion today. That was the measure of how effective this treatment was going to be. Turned me into a bit of a zombie. There's certain memories that I've still lost. There's a short-term memory issue. Of course, it's convenient now at work when people say to me, do you remember this thing that happened? I say, no, sorry, that was pre-shock treatment. I can't remember. In fact, the scary thing was when I went back to work, I'd been part of an interview panel. And the HR consultant who was managing this panel came to me and said, I need to sign off on the scores that I'd given. Well, firstly, I didn't recognize this guy. And I was sort of thinking, am I being set up for something weird, you know, appointing people that I know nothing about? But I didn't want to let on, so I smiled and said, yeah, no problem. Looked at the names on the list, didn't recognize any of them, didn't recognize the scores. Went back, checked my diary, and true enough, I'd been on this panel, but have absolutely no memory of it, even till today. Why did it happen? Well, I ignored the signs from 1990, the issue of burnout. Maybe my supervisors, managers, or organizations should have ensured better knowledge about work-life balance. I'm a perfectionist, so I'm my own worst enemy when it comes to standards. I'm a workaholic. I had to admit that. I think it's the same as going to AA, where you greet everyone, you say, my name is Brett, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a drug addict. Well, I have to admit and say I'm a workaholic. I love my work. Still do today. But that means inherently there's a weakness there that is waiting to be exploited. Burning the candle at both ends, no boundaries, continuous state of crisis management. Whether it was real crisis or self-imposed or employer-imposed. Why did it happen? Because it did. Sometimes there's no reason for it, or no understandable reason. And philosophically, I thought I'll end up with, why does anything happen? How did it make me feel? Loss of hope, loss of faith, desperate, dead, exhausted, not able to think, anxious, panic attacks, angry, frustrated, withdrawn, sad, in bed, trouble concentrating, indecisiveness, forgetfulness. Only a few. I think if I'd spent more time, I could have populated that list a lot more. What about God? You know, in times like that, you ask yourself, is God real? Because if he was real, why would he have allowed it? Is he there? We're told that he's there. We're told to believe that he's there. But when you're depressed and you're looking for some sign or feeling or indication, often there's none. Does he care? Why did he allow it to happen? Was it him? What about prayer? What about prayer? I think I stopped praying. I stopped reading the Bible. Worship. What's worship when you feel dead? Christians can't be depressed, can they? And what does it mean to believe? You know, I think it was in that time that you learned to, I don't want to say hate the slogans, but you know, that don't worry, God cares. Don't worry, God loves you. Pray, worship more, go to church more, do everything more, but nothing changes the state you're in. And I think, you know, prior to the Depression, there's a few authors that I consider mentors. One is Brennan Manning, and he's got a book called The Ragamuffin Gospel. And it's in times that you really feel lesser than less and a failure that the ragamuffin gospel resonates. So the basic premise is the gospel's for ragamuffins, not for those who are perfect and upstanding. There's another author called Mike Iaconelli. He wrote a book called Messy Spirituality. And that really resonated because he tells the story of a congregation much like this and following a liturgy. And the church was made up of homeless people, drunks, business guys, and a particular old lady was sitting really enjoying the service, and she missed the fact that she was supposed to stand up and read the scripture. And the church sort of got quiet and everyone was waiting, and she sat and everyone waited, everyone was quiet, and eventually she realized, and she uttered an expletive, and there was a deathly silence. And then everyone burst out laughing. Because messy spirituality is about what's real. And, you know, if you look at the people Jesus spent time with, then I think we've set our own standards very high. What did I learn? No one's ever strong enough. What is the definition of strength anyway? Depression is not a sign of weakness. Medication helps. You know, I can't overemphasize this importance, and I'll illustrate it with a story. In that period that I said I disappeared for a while, I was actually undercover, and obviously stress, adrenaline was pumping. And I noticed that I was getting more and more aggro, to the extent that I locked my pistol in the safe at home. We worked from home. We had special communication, and I knew there was something wrong. I ended up in a road rage incident. I was the victim, but if I'm honest, I actually lured the aggressor because I needed to let go of some of this aggression. And the aggressor found himself the victim, and then I realized actually I could be in trouble. Then, by chance, there was a local general practitioner who gave a lecture at my son's school on the brain chemistries. And he had done a lot of research and he specialized in that. So I made an appointment, went to see him. He said, your adrenaline levels are much too high. I forget the medication he gave me. But the point is, after 2 days, I felt like someone else. And that scared me because it made me realize that a thing called brain chemistry could have turned me into a murderer. Coming on the medication, I was peace-loving, a good Christian. And that has always been in my mind to realize, this thing of brain chemistry and medication, you can't look down on it. Psychiatric and psychological treatments. I'm on my 3rd psychologist, not because the others have been particularly bad. It's the circumstances over a period of time. Same psychiatrist. I relate absolutely to what Craig is saying. Every time I would see her, I would say, has anyone invented the test yet? She'd say, what test? I said, that one that they can just check your blood and will say serotonin's at 60%, dopamine's at 30%, noradrenaline is at what, and then you'll get a pill that will somehow magically put everything in line. And she'd laugh and say, no, not yet, sorry. There's times when she'll say, yes, there's a promising pull out. I'm on extremely high doses of medication. Even the psychiatrist was shocked at the level of medication it took to bring some stability. But it's quite a few pills. So she was talking about this one pill. So every time I see her now, I say, is that one pill out yet? She'll say, no, I'm still waiting for results. So you can realize that even that one pill, the experts still actually don't know how the effect that it's having. The role of God and faith, that's a difficult one, It's only recently, when I say recently, in the last few months, that I'm starting to acknowledge that God exists, that God is there, that He still cares. But I think the scripture that I read you, that grace is more than sufficient. You see, I think we don't understand that context. We've set this very high standard, and we expect everything to be very good and nice and perfect. It's the perfect world. Unfortunately, Christian TV doesn't help because everyone on Christian TV looks happy. They're singing joyfully, not a hair out of place. And I think somehow we internalize these things, and now we've sort of come to accept that, okay, to be a Christian equals a certain type of standard. But I think faith is messy, that it's actually feeling like dying, because you see, dying for a Christian is actually quite black, isn't it? At least you go to heaven. So many times I would lie there and think, but that would be so much better, being in heaven rather than dealing with all of this nonsense that one has to deal with. And I think it's only when you look back, you don't realize the grace in the moment. It can even be years later, I think, because that's what I'm experiencing. When you look back, you recognize the grace. Stigma. Yeah, stigma. Depends who you speak to. From the start, I've always been very open. I post a lot on Facebook about depression. I noticed the school was informed. So I would go with my wife to the school, and people would come up and greet her, and I'm standing right next to her. And I'm like waiting to catch their eye and smile, and they would ignore me. And then I would think, but this is strange, eh? And these are Christians as well, Christian school. And it happened once, it happened twice. And I said to my wife, is there something wrong with that woman? No, why? She ignores me. I'm standing right in front of her and she ignores me. And then I realized, you see, they knew that I was depressed. And they were giving support to my wife, which was good. But somehow, the stigma thing is, don't look, it's like they're scared to catch your eye in case you do something mad. Because that's the stigma, isn't it? If you've got a mental illness, you can be unpredictable. In fact, I've spread the rumor at work that I am mental and I can possibly act in very funny ways, depending on whatever meeting I'm in. So if you were the particularly different manager and you start sort of widening your eyes and looking, maybe they'll calm down. And community and family is important. I think without them, the impact on family, I think, is immeasurable. Because they suffer with you something that they don't always understand. And then honesty. I think the one thing I've learned is even if it costs stigma, we have to be honest about what is happening so that you can turn the stigma around. There's a lady at work, close friend. I'll often make comments like, people will be talking about deadlines, and I'm like, hey, relax, remember I'm a bit mental. And she would call me to her office and sit me down and say, Brett, please don't talk like that. I'm like, well, what's the problem? She doesn't want people to think that I'm weak because she thinks I'm a good worker and a good boss. And I'm like, well, actually, I don't really care. But you see the stigma, even out of concern people have for you, they say, please don't act weak. That's a bit of getting to know me. Martha can take the baton as if we're running a sprint. But after this, we can engage and talk.